So, hello everyone, and welcome to the final installment of the Bring Your Cup Coffee Catch Up for Legal Innovators series. I'm your host, Brittany Hernandez. I'm a lawyer, a gavel expert, and full time gavel rep, and the founder of Variable Academy, where we empower lawyers with hands on experience with legal technology through certification courses in AI and automation. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by none other than Colin Levy. Thank you so much for being here, Colin. It's so good to get to see you. I'm first going to do a quick intro about Colin and his incredible book, The Legal Tech Ecosystem. I'll then interview Colin about his career and the various themes that have come up in the book. We'll open it up for audience questions and conclude with a quick wrap up. I first connected with Colin back in 2022. And since then, I've just seen his career skyrocket. Now, with over 48,000 followers on LinkedIn, Colin is a top voice on all things legal tech and legal transformation. By day, Colin serves as general counsel at leading contract lifecycle management company Malbec. By night, Colin's a prolific writer with a popular blog and several publications. He's the author of The Legal Tech Ecosystem, which we'll be discussing today, co-author of CLM for Dummies, editor of the Handbook of Legal Tech, and just last week, he released a guide called AI for Lawyers Cutting Through the Noise, so be sure to check that out. We'll focus our discussion today, though, on Colin's career trajectory and his book, The Legal Tech Ecosystem, specifically because we read it for our Variable Community Book Club last month. The legal tech ecosystem, innovation, advancement, and the future of law practice addresses the pressures of reshaping legal departments, regulatory complexity, globalization challenges, and demands to do more with less. This accessible guide shares insights from legal technology leaders and practitioners. I pretty much recognized almost every single name that was brought up, and there were many names, and they're all major players in the legal tech space. The book tackles the cultural and organizational factors that determine whether technology adoption succeeds or fails, and shares why legal technology enhances rather than replaces legal practice, and how to lead digital transformation with a people first approach. Whether you're at a law firm, legal department, or law school, this roadmap helps you understand where legal technology is today and implement it effectively for tomorrow. So now, without further ado, let's chat with Colin. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and then go ahead and highlight him as well for everyone. Thanks so much for being here, Colin.
Thanks for having me. It's really it's fun to see you again.
Yeah, fun to see you. So I would first love to hear just a 2-minute recap of your career trajectory and how you got to where you are today, what interested you in the law, how did you get involved in legal tech and the education space?
Yeah, sure. That alone could be a whole session in of itself, but because it wasn't straightforward. But to kind of give the short version of it, so yeah, I worked sort of a variety of temp jobs as a lawyer when I first graduated from law school. But as I was working in those various jobs, I realized, and this was something that occurred to me actually when I was in law school as well, was the gap between um, reality and what law school was pretending was reality. And more specifically, that has to do with technology, data, and just the way the world worked back when I first began practicing as a lawyer, and certainly as it operates today. And so, realizing that gap, I kind of took it upon myself to reach out to a variety of different individuals, some of whom I reference, write about, or quote in the book, um, who were trying to close that gap through education, creation of tools, or some combination of those two things. And so it was those conversations that then set me off on the path of learning about what legal tech really is, what it can be, what it should be doing, and these days, how AI is impacting what not just what legal tech is, but more broadly, what it means to actually be a lawyer and practice law. And so, being someone who likes to write, I kind of, in addition to working as a lawyer in a variety of different roles, and currently as general counsel of Malbec, which is in the contract lifecycle management space, I have written a lot of content about helping people understand what legal tech is, how AI is playing a role in reshaping what legal tech is, and how to get started learning about it. And so that really is what continues to drive me, is this drive to help educate and inspire others about it through the content that I do, because I think there's just so much noise out there and so much uh, just sort of nonsense, if you will. And I really have a mission of trying to cut through all of that for folks to the extent to which one person can do that. And so that's sort of been the journey that I've been on for a number of years now, and continue to be on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that summary as well. And I know I could totally hear that there's so much in there that you could dive deeper into, and we have such a short time, but it's so fascinating to hear how everyone has kind of ended up where they are. We've all gone on different journeys. In my case, I was in the military, then went to law school, then worked at a legal tech startup, had my own solo, did a whole bunch of different things. And we all find our own way to understanding and kind of coming into this world of legal technology. And also, what I think is really interesting about the book is, even though it's talking about like the legal tech ecosystem, what I love about your book is really the idea of it's not really about technology. It's really more about the overall transformation. And transformation doesn't always have to come from the standpoint of technology. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. But I wanted to pick up on a couple of major themes in the book, and we'll kind of break each one down in turn and spend a little bit of time with each one. So the first one is around the concept of change. Then we'll go into the second theme of mindset, the third one around education, and then the fourth one around new ways of serving. And we'll spend a few minutes on each one here. First, let's talk about this concept of change, because that is a huge theme that runs throughout the book. And I think even if you just look at the table of contents themselves, it's like change management, change implementation, change this. And it's really important because there's so many different types, but I wanted to specifically focus this conversation on the difference, because there's a quote where I can't remember who exactly it was, but talks about the difference between sustaining change and transformational change, which is kind of what we talked about in this idea of transformation can take many forms. But can you go in deeper into what each of these things mean when we say sustaining change versus transformational change, and why it's important to understand the difference when thinking about what it means to be innovative as a lawyer or firm?
Yeah, so I think really the reason why I emphasize change a lot in the book, just sort of to set the ground for what I'll say briefly soon, is the fact that humans in general are accustomed and want to find something that works and stick with it, even if it's imperfect or not exactly the ideal situation, which makes change very difficult because folks don't want to change something that already works for the most part, even if they're not entirely happy with it. And I think, frankly, it goes back to our ancestors who were hunters and gatherers and kind of were just trying to find something that worked so that they could just survive. And these days, it's largely less about survival per se, and more about just simply managing and continuing on and making progress. So that's sort of a long, wordy way of saying that change is difficult. Um, and it's even more difficult to not just engage in change, but to make it sustainable and lasting. And that's because lasting change tends to be the result of cultural support and a culture that supports change and buys into the change that is needed and being proposed. And I think a lot of leaders in many companies understand, at least successful ones understand that, and those that are less successful don't understand that. Um, and moreover, with respect to sort of transformational change, and this ties into making it sustainable as well, is that it's really about starting with something that you can build off of. So I tend to be a big proponent, I should say, of starting small when it comes to change, doing something that is fairly easy to change and using that as a foundation to build off of for larger change. Because I think there's a tendency, especially these days with the amount of noise and hype that exists around technology, to go from A to Z in no time at all. When I think it's better to go from A to B to C to D to E, etc. Um, and so that starts with kind of understanding where people are to begin with and where you want them to be and how you're going to get them to get from A to B. And that really, again, starts with understanding how they work, why they work the way they do, and how you could help them see that it's not in your interest necessarily, but more so theirs to change and to enact, um, a different way of doing something, a new process, a new tool, what have you. Um, and so this really comes from, I think, a different type of mindset and one that's open to new ideas, and not just new ideas that are coming from someone from the outside, but new ideas that are coming from someone that they trust and value and actually listen to, as well as setting realistic expectations for what's going to occur and acknowledging the fact that it's likely going to be hard. It may not always happen as you expect, and there will be unexpected surprises and so on. I think, being real and realistic and transparent and honest about what exactly is going to happen, I think will set people at ease so that they don't start off on the wrong foot or start off thinking that, oh, this is just going to be very straightforward and everything will be great in just a matter of a few days, a few weeks, or what have you.
Yeah, totally. And I love that you said, it's not always about jumping light years ahead of where you are at the moment, but also taking those kind of incremental steps towards kind of transformation. And I think what really struck me in the book around this kind of this distinction between sustaining and transformational is this idea that sustaining change is really around like sustaining what you're already doing, but doing it in a better, faster, more efficient way. So instead of it actually being a different way of practicing law overall, it's more a way of generating documents faster that you were already preparing before, or like having a more efficient way of like having somebody book a time with you. And these are all very important, but it's kind of a way of supplementing or sustaining the way things already are, versus the transformational side being around like, are there brand new ways for us to interact with clients? Are not necessarily brand new, but how can we leverage what's available to really transform how we interact with clients? I love what Trisha says in the chat. She said, "Let small wins rack up. Small, quick quality of life improvement help you accrue a credibility as a change maker in organizations, especially when there is change fatigue." I love that. That's such a great comment. And also around that idea of like credibility as a change maker inside of an organization, because I've had conversations with people where they are trying to help promote change within the organization, even just on the sustaining level, and not necessarily on we have to do something completely different and transform the legal industry. Maybe it's just generating documents faster. And there is that kind of quick win of like, how can we make it? And what she was saying is it has to be as easy as possible for the user to use, because people are trying to transition this baby step at a time. So I think that's such a great point. So
Yeah,
let
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's really just a matter of, again, being someone who is kind of a student of people. It's a matter of understanding people and understanding how to get through to them, in many ways. And I think that's something incredibly important for leaders to understand, and really for anyone who's trying to enact change.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked a little bit about mindset, and I would love to kind of go into that deeper. You distinguish in the book between kind of being user centric and being client centric. So what I mean by that is like, how can we ultimately implement technology that helps us do our job better and faster, but actually understand that it's really about the client, the end client, and delivering the best work product, services, and experience for them. So something that, for example, always grounds me in this, and this is something that you mentioned in the book as well, is Richard Susskind's often quoted "clients want a hole, not a drill" analogy. So I'll just explain this quickly, and then I'll ask my question here. But the idea being that when a client goes to a store, they're not saying like, oh, what I really want is to buy a drill. What they really want is to be able to go home and like hang something on the wall. And so for us, I think sometimes, and it's like obviously to no fault of our own, we kind of like are caught in our everyday processes. And for this idea of being user centric, a vendor might be user centric. I, as a vendor, might want to make your experience as using my technology a really seamless experience and give you everything that you want. But I think ultimately thinking about how we're using not only technology, but our having our services surrounded around what makes for the best client experience is going to be the huge difference here. So my question is, can you elaborate a bit more on that concept of user centric versus client centric and why it's important as a mindset shift?
Yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is clients just want their problem solved. They want to know how they can move forward through whatever problem they may be facing or quandary or issue or whatever it may be. And they just want a solution. And as for the lawyers, the lawyers, I think it's important for them to understand that the tools they use to get to the solution are important in terms of what they choose to get there. But they don't need to necessarily, the users, the clients don't necessarily need to be told or care so much about, well, I'm using this because of X, Y, or Z. They care more about, is this going to solve my problem or not? Uh, and I think it's actually an interesting question to be considering now because I think before AI, certainly the knowing about what tool you're using was not as necessarily a question clients were interested in. But I think these days with AI, actually, I would push back upon that that quote just a little bit and what I had said, just because times change and say that I do think there is some degree of transparency as well, though, these days that clients do want to know, is AI being used to assist with this or what have you, due to some of the imperfections that AI presents and sometimes not so clear ways. But that being said, bottom line is lawyers need to focus their efforts upon listening to the client, understand what the client wants and what they want to get done, and providing a way forward. And I'm a little biased in terms of saying that because I work primarily as an in-house attorney, not for a firm. But bottom line is, I think regardless of working for a firm or in-house, the client mindset is the same, which is that I want to know what I need to do to get this done from A to B, and how best I can get there.
Yeah.
And how can my lawyer, how can the lawyer help me best get there? Which these days may or may not necessarily be understanding about what tools they're using. Uh, but I do think again it comes back to the fact that clients really, at the end of the day, they care most about outcomes. They care most about how to get whatever they need to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another aspect of mindset that came up in the book, it has to do with how lawyers relate to and interact with vendors of legal technology, how they interact with what are called minimum viable products and tools not being perfect 100% of the time, because there's this whole difference between the tech world and how engineers are trained versus how lawyers are trained. Because here's the difference, right? It's like when a software engineer is creating something, they're taught to ship fast and iterate, right? It's like, let's get this out there in the hands of the user and see how they're using it so that we can change it and make it better, which is a completely different process than a lawyer. We're not going to go in front of a judge and like test things out and see which one works. We're not going to give them like, here's a version of the argument and a B version of the argument. Which one are you going to go for? So it's a completely different way of approaching your work. And so we're, as lawyers, interacting with engineers creating products with a completely different approach to shipping those products and presenting them to us, not as 100% perfect when they hit the market, but as something that you almost have to collaborate on. Where if you find something that's not working, you don't just stop using it, you tell them and say, hey, this isn't working, or I would love to see this feature added on as well. And it's more of like a co-creation in some ways. So can you talk about that mindset shift that you have to make when dealing with the tech world?
Yeah, this is something I myself have had to kind of evolve and adapt to, which is that when you are taught to be a lawyer, you're essentially taught, among other things, that everything has to be perfect. No mistakes, no issues, nothing has to be absolutely perfect 100% of the time. The world, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, is not that way. It's going to continue to evolve. People outside of law are going to make mistakes. They're continuing to make mistakes. The key and most successful of those folks who do make mistakes is they learn from those mistakes and improve. And that's something I think the legal world really can learn from the tech world is that tech tech folks embrace change, they embrace learning from failure, embrace iteration. And lawyers too, I think, have to understand that if they can get 80% of where they want to be, that's progress. And they likely can get the other 20% over time, as opposed to just feeling like they can't present something until it's 100% where it needs to be, which may or may not be realistic. And again, this maybe comes from the fact that I work in-house, but I need to move fairly quickly and be fairly active. And so I can't always present something that's going to be absolutely perfect. I also can't expect perfection out of myself, considering I, like all of you, are humans and humans are imperfect, which means that the tools we create are imperfect. So I have to accept that sort of 80%, good enough sort of line, and knowing that I can always do better and can improve, because we all should be improving. And this becomes especially clear in the sense when I, for example, am assisting with helping to, test products or test functionality. Things don't always work. Things sometimes actually kind of fall apart and are terrible. But it's better for them to know that things are terrible and falling apart at the outset rather than not know that, number one, or know that, look, this is really good. We'll likely get some pushback or some feedback, but I do think people will find this valuable. And we don't know what we don't know. And so I think to present something that's 80% good to someone and then get feedback and adapt it and improvement is much better than not presenting anything just until it's 100% of what you think it should be. And again, that's, I also think, a reflection, just the world itself is not a world that has been successful because it's been perfect. It's been successful because it's been 80% of the way there. And there's been folks and mindsets and tools that have adapted to the changing dynamics of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Trisha's comment. As she said, I literally asked my GC the same thing. What percent of these requirements do you need to consider this a success? 80%, 85%? And the response was 100%. So I feel like that is, that's the world that we're coming from. And I totally understand it because the stakes are so high. If a vendor gets something wrong, they could lose a customer, they could, but they know what the problem is to try to fix it. Whereas with us, we could get sued by our clients, we could be disbarred. The stakes are so high. So I'm going to move us now to our third theme and then quickly cover our fourth one just so that we could take a question or so before we wrap. So you highlighted in the book some incredible work being done at law schools like Suffolk and Vanderbilt, among many others. I know you personally got a certificate in legal innovation and technology from Suffolk. So how are law schools adapting to the shifting landscape, and what can practicing attorneys do to get up to speed and stay up to speed as things change so rapidly?
Yeah, so I think that, Suffolk Law School that I actually teach as an adjunct professor at Albany, Vanderbilt, um, Northeastern, they're all, I think, doing important work integrating practical skills and tech competency skills into their curricula. And I think that's super important because when you graduate from law school, traditionally you didn't know what the hell you were doing because all you were taught for 3 years was just legal history. And then you're left to the wolves and you're kind of like, what the hell did I just spend 3 years doing? At least in the US. Maybe it's a little bit different in Europe. Hopefully it is. Uh, and so I think, staying current and kind of being aware of what the actual world is as it is and all its ugliness, I think is super critical for lawyers to be aware of and understand so that they can be most effective for those who are trying to help, as opposed to trying to, fight the reality of the world because they've been taught it's one way and then realizing it's not. So I do think that law schools that are adapting by creating certificates, clinics, and courses that incorporate tech literacy as a core competency rather than sort of some elective curiosity, I think is really the way forward, frankly. And that's why I've been a big supporter of Suffolk and other schools like it that are being proactive in trying to actually help graduate lawyers who are in some ways better prepared to meet the needs of today's world than has historically been the case. Law schools certainly have a long way to go at this point, to be honest, but they are making progress, and I'm doing what I can to help highlight those that are making that progress.
Yeah, amazing. So, since we only have about 30 seconds left, I just wanted to highlight really quickly the last piece. I know it won't have this be a question. I'm just going to kind of summarize or highlight the new ways of serving. Is just this idea that there are ways that we can transform or change the way that we deliver legal services to our clients that increase access to justice while also allowing us to scale at a volume we couldn't if we still maintain the billable hour model. So, I'll encourage you all to check out the book to learn more about these alternative billing models and different things we can do to scale our practices while also helping people who don't have access to justice. So thank you so much to Colin for your time. I'm just going to end us here. If you have any questions, feel free to either reach out to Colin or you can pass them through to me as well. So thank you for your time today, Colin, for everyone being on, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.